The screen is black. The sound of a single, distant rifle shot echoes. It is followed by the rising, mournful strains of Spanish guitar music. It was the war that baptized the horrors of the 20th century, a bloody laboratory for new weapons, new ideologies, and a new kind of hatred. Before the world plunged into the darkness of the Second World War, it first tore itself apart in Spain. This was more than a civil war. It was the first great battle in a global ideological conflict, a fight for the soul of a nation where fascism and communism, democracy and dictatorship, tradition and revolution collided with apocalyptic force. For 3 years, from 1936 to 1939, Spain became the battleground where the future was decided. But to understand the true, brutal nature of this conflicto atrocities, the political betrayals, the foreign interventions that shaped its course, we need to look beyond the sanitized textbooks. The full story is one of unvarnished, often shocking human drama. For that deep a dive, our partner AHTV offers a wealth of documentaries that explore history without the filters. They have an entire collection on 20th century conflicts, including in-depth series on the factions of the Spanish Civil War. You can explore it all, completely uncensored. New users can get their first month entirely free by using the code UNCENSORED at checkout. The link is in the description. The Spanish Civil War did not begin with a gunshot in July 1936. It began with centuries of fracture. A deeply conservative, Catholic country, ruled by a landed aristocracy and a powerful military, watched as the modern world encroached. In the 1930s, the Great Depression crushed the poor, while a growing urban working class and a militant anarchist movement demanded nothing less than revolution. The flashpoint was the election of February 1936. A fragile coalition of left-wing parties, Popular Front won a narrow victory. They ranged from moderate Republicans and socialists to communists and the radical anarchists of the CNT trade union. For the right, the monarchists, the industrialists, the church, and the arm of this was the final, intolerable provocation. Spain, to them, was hurtling toward a godless, communist abyss. The man who would become the face of the nationalist, or rebel, cause was not its initial mastermind, but he would become its undisputed leader, General Franco, a cautious, careerist officer known for his brutal suppression of a miners' uprising in 1934. Franco was posted to the remote Canary Islands by the Republican government, hoping to neutralize him. He was a symbol of the old guard, ruthless, pious, and convinced that only military discipline could save Spain from chaos. On the other side stood the Republic, a desperate, fractious government trying to hold the center. President Manuel Azana was a liberal intellectual, attempting to enact land reform and curtail the power of the church and army. But he was caught between the revolutionary fervor of his own far-left supporters, who began seizing land and burning churches, and the rising, thunderous anger of the right. The political center was not just crumbling, it was being deliberately bombarded from both flanks. The conspiracy was set. On July 17, 1936, army garrisons across Spanish Morocco rose in revolt. The next day, the rebellion spread to mainland Spain. The plan, led by generals like Emilio Mola and José Sanguero, was a pronunciamiento. Swift military takeover batted Filed. Instead of a clean victory, the coup sliced Spain in two. Major cities like Madrid and Barcelona remained loyal to the Republic, thanks largely to worker militias who stormed army barracks. What was planned as a surgical strike had ignited a continental inferno, and the world immediately rushed to pour fuel on the flames. Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany saw a chance to test their new armies and support a kindred fascist cause. Within weeks, German Ru-52 transports were airlifting Franco's elite army of Africa from Morocco to the mainland. A decisive logistical move. Italian volunteers and German Condor Legion pilots and tanks followed. This was the Nationalists' lifeline. The Republic, legally the recognized government, appealed to the democratic powers for help. They were met with a policy of non-intervention, a cowardly farce brokered by Britain and France. Terrified of provoking a wider war, they embargoed the Spanish Republic. Only two nations answered the call: the Soviet Union and Mexico. Stalin saw an opportunity to spread Soviet influence and control the Spanish left. Soviet advisors, political operatives, and weapons began to arrive, but at a high price in gold and in political compliance. Music. A tense, driving orchestral score begins under the narration. And so, the war became international. On the Republican side, idealists from across the globe, the International Brigade, writers like George Orwell and Ernest Hemingway, students, trade unionists, and all drawn to what they saw as the great fight against the rising tide of fascism. They fought with courage, but often with tragic futility. At places like the bloody siege of Madrid and the frozen battles of Jarama and Guadalajara, the war's true, horrific character was revealed not on a battlefield, but in a small market town in the Basque Country. On April 26, 1937, a Monday market day, the German Condor Legion, in close coordination with Franco's Nationalists, launched an experiment in terror bombing. For over 3 hours, squadrons of Heinkel and Junkers bombers, followed by strafing fighter planes, systematically reduced Guernica to rubble, a slow-motion sequence of the famous photographs. Ruined buildings, a lone survivor in the streets, the famous Guernica painting. The world was stunned. The targeting of a civilian center with no military value was a calculated act of psychological warfare. It was a message. Resistance is futile. Pablo Picasso immortalized the atrocity in his monumental, anguished painting, Guernica, which became the single most powerful image of the war's suffering. The Nationalists, and their German allies, flatly denied it. They blamed the Republicans for dynamiting their own town. It was the birth of the modern big lie propaganda technique. By 1938, the Republic was being squeezed. A critical split had fractured their side. A brutal internal conflict in Barcelona between anarchists and communists, suppressed by Soviet-backed forces, shattered Republican unity. Franco, now the unquestioned Kafili, consolidated his forces and drove to the Mediterranean, cutting Republican Spain in two in a last, desperate gamble. The Republican Army launched its greatest offensive, the Battle of the Ebro, in July 1938. For over 3 months, under the scorching summer sun, over 100,000 men fought a war of attrition in the desolate hills along the Ebro River. It was the Republic's final display of heroic, organized resistance. But they were outgunned, outfought by the relentless nationalist army, and crucially, dominated in the air by the German and Italian air forces. By November, the Republicans were shattered, retreating back across the river. The heart of the Republic had been ripped out. The road to Barcelona, and then to Madrid, was now open. The end was a grim, foregone conclusion. Barcelona fell in January 1939, Madrid in March. The democratic powers, still hoping to appease Hitler, recognized Franco's regime. The final, tragic exodus saw 500,000 refugees flee across the French border, where they were interned in squalid concentration camps. Franco's victory was not the end of the war, but the beginning of a savage peace. His was a policy of systematic vengeance. Executions, show trials, and imprisonment in labor camps became the tools of purification. He built a state based on national Catholicism, extreme conservatism, and a personality cult, meticulously erasing the memory of the Republic. Spain would remain a dictatorship for the next 36 years, a frozen relic of the 1930s in a rapidly changing post-war Europe. So, what was the Spanish Civil War? It was the prologue. The techniques of blitzkrieg, strategic bombing, and propaganda perfected in Spain would be unleashed globally just months after Franco's victory parade. The international brigades foreshadowed a world war where ideals would be fought for on a global scale. The cynical non-intervention pact foreshadowed the appeasement at Munich, but more than that, it framed the defining ideological struggle of the century. The clash of totalitarianisms against a fragile democracy. It was a war where there were no clean hands, where idealism was often crushed between the millstones of fascist brutality and communist realpolitik. It taught a terrible lesson, that in a fight between extremists, the center cannot hold. The echoes of that struggle are still with us, in debates over foreign intervention, in the weaponization of disinformation, and in the enduring scars that a civil conflict leaves on a nation's psyche. The war, to understand it, is never truly over. To continue exploring the complex, unvarnished truths of history. Support our work by checking out You can get unrestricted access to their entire library. Use code UNCENSORED for a 100% free first month. Or for long-term access at an incredible value, use code COMMUNITY for just $20 for a full year. Links below. For HISTCOOP, I'm narrator Name. Until next time, the mournful Spanish guitar music returns, fading up as the final shot holds on a weathered photograph of a Republican militiaman looking toward an uncertain future. The music swells, then fades to black.